C'est tout bon.
Bonjour ou bonsoir. Deon Meyer, merci de nous rejoindre depuis l'Afrique du Sud. Merci de nous rejoindre à Paris, dans les bureaux du Point. On est au bord du périphérique. Chez nous, c'est l'été. Chez vous, c'est l'hiver. Et vous nous rejoignez pour parler polar à nouveau, puisqu'on organise donc ces rencontres, ces live polar avec Quai du Polar et Le Point. Et cette fois, c'est pour la sortie de votre livre. On a loupé la sortie de peu. Vous êtes sorti évidemment en plein mois d'août. La France s'arrête. Deon Meyer, La femme au manteau bleu, c'est la 8e enquête de Benny Grissel. Et on est ravis de vous avoir. Bonsoir. Je vais vous présenter très rapidement pour ceux qui ne vous connaissent pas. En disant presque rien, simplement que vous êtes l'auteur de polar non seulement le plus connu, mais historique, puisque vous êtes le premier à faire paraître un roman policier à la fin de l'apartheid, 3 ans après. Votre premier roman, c'est 1994, c'est l'année où Mandela devient président d'Afrique du Sud, et vous avez 36 ans, vous étiez jusqu'à présent journaliste. C'est pas encore Benny Grissel. Benny Grissel, il arrive plus tard, il arrive à votre 5e roman, en 2005, chez nous c'est 2007, ça s'appelle Le pic du diable en français, et vous allez nous raconter un petit peu, j'espère, avant d'arriver à cette femme au manteau bleu, à cette nouvelle aventure, en tout cas de ce flic du Cap. Racontez-nous, bonsoir Deon, bienvenue, racontez-nous un peu la naissance, parce qu'on ne se souvient plus très bien, il arrive d'où Benny Grissel? Comment est-ce qu'il a émergé dans votre... comme ça, 5e polar?
Bonsoir Julie, j'aurais adoré, mais simplement, c'est bon, de la langue, la dignité de l'occasion et translated novel. The English title was Dead Before Dying. I had to create a character that only had one task. And I needed this character to be drunk, and I needed him to spoil the protagonist's evening with a young lady. I needed him to walk in and spoil the evening. So without thinking too much about the kind of character, I just needed a drunken cop, an alcoholic cop. I thought I'll name him after the son of my favorite teacher at high school. My favorite teacher at high school was Mr. Ben Grissel, and he had a son, Benny. And I thought I will make him look a little bit like Benny Grissel, and I will name him after the guy. And then I thought he was going to be maybe 1 or 2 pages in the book. And when the scene happened, I thought, well, that was a fun character to have. And he sort of came back as I wrote the book. He came into the book more and more, and it kept being fun. The characters are very strange in that way, in that certain characters just make the writing process so much easier because of their personalities. They give you a lot more creative options. They make things happen on the page. They surprise you with their reactions, with their actions. And Benny Grissel was like that. So at the end of that book, Benny Grissel was a substantial character, not a major character, not one of the main characters, but a substantial enough character. And he sort of stuck in the back of my mind. And I thought, he was such fun to write about that one day, if I find the right story, I will come back to him and I will make him the protagonist. And that is what happened with Le Pic du Diable. And then, of course, the problem was that I had this character that I created in a previous book that was an alcoholic. And an alcoholic cop is a sort of a cliche in the genre. So I was confronted with this problem of what do I do with this cliche? And I thought the only thing that I can do is to really explore the alcoholism that many people in law enforcement battle with because of the post-traumatic stress that they often go through during their work. So I made it my job to research alcoholism, to really make Benny as real a character as I could. And that is more or less the story of Benny.
Benny, il a une quarantaine d'années. Qu'est-ce qui lui est arrivé depuis sa création? D'abord, pourquoi est-ce qu'il est devenu alcoolique? Pourquoi est-ce qu'il a arrêté? Vous avez dessiné sa vie ces dernières années. Racontez-nous un petit peu les grandes lignes, voilà, du personnage.
Sure. Well, when you meet him in Le Pic du Diable, he's already an alcoholic, and he started drinking because of, in South Africa, the homicide cops, the detectives who do the murder investigations, they're confronted with these terrible murder scenes almost on a daily basis. And I think many of them, and in Benny's case specifically, Benny's way of coping with all this violence, with coping with the fact that he experiences this all the time, and you know, it becomes a very interesting psychological thing. Why the psychologists tell me that detectives often feel they see all this violence, they see the bad side of human nature, and they feel that they can't protect their own family members, their own loved ones against this, and that is how they often compensate, either through depression or by drinking too much. There are various ways that they cope with it. So that was when we meet Benny Grissel in Le Pic du Diable. He's already an alcoholic. And in that book, his wife leaves him. She says that she's had enough. He's got to choose between her and the bottle. And in the next book, Benny gets divorced. And then when you write suspense fiction and crime fiction, then you're always looking for sources of conflict. And conflict has many layers in a book. There's the conflict between the murderer or the criminal and the policeman, but there's also the conflict inside the characters themselves, and the conflict that they have with their immediate loved ones, with their colleagues, with the system. So there are many levels of conflict. And with Benny, I decided to explore his journey and his life, to putting him through new phases in life. Because that, I think, the big danger of writing a series character is that the character remains the same, and then the books all start looking as if they're the same books, just different stories every time. So I've tried to make Benny's journey as interesting as possible by, in 13 hours, I had him meet a woman who's also an alcoholic and falling in love with her. And in the subsequent books, his relationship with her, his relationship with his estranged wife, his relationship with his children and with his colleagues. So this has all been part of the journey. And then in The Woman in the Blue Cloak, Benny finally makes the big decision of wanting to ask Alexa, the woman in his life, to marry him, which is again conflict for him because he's very unsure if it's the right thing. She's a woman of substantial means. He's just a policeman on a policeman's salary, so he's very uncomfortable with that inequality. So these are all my efforts to try and keep the conflict in Benny's life alive and interesting for the reader.
Et elle l'est, et justement, c'est ce qui est amusant dans ce volume, c'est qu'un flic dur à cuire comme Benny, justement, et commence à expérimenter véritablement l'amour avec un grand A. On pourrait dire il va y avoir un petit côté guimauve, mais pas tellement. Finalement, c'est une introspection. Non, vous êtes en train de nous expliquer pourquoi finalement c'est bien l'amour, mais pourquoi il faut se marier en plus. Enfin, je trouvais ça assez saisissant, justement, qui s'engage dans cette voie. Pourquoi la taille du diamant, ça compte? Ça a de l'importance?
Well, I think men think so, and Benny certainly thinks that the size of the diamond will be an indication of the size of his love. And he's very embarrassed that he can't afford a big diamond, so he's trying to get a bargain. He's trying to use everybody that he knows to try and get as big a diamond as he can, because as I said, Alexa is a woman of substantial means. She's quite rich. So he does not want to embarrass her, and he also does not want to embarrass himself.
Alors, c'est effectivement l'histoire d'un emprunt bancaire, hein, du début à la fin. En filigrane, on a effectivement comment Béni va s'en sortir, se décider à acheter ou à emprunter pour offrir un diamant aussi pur que son amour. Et puis, il y a aussi l'histoire d'un cadavre, finalement. On va commencer par ça. Il y a un minibus qui s'arrête, les gens descendent, c'est tranquille, hein, il ne se passe pas grand-chose, mais il y a un cadavre totalement lavé à l'eau de Javel dès le début, dès les premières pages. Les médias vont l'appeler le cadavre blanc, d'ailleurs. Il n'y a plus aucune trace. On ne sait pas au départ qui est cette femme ni pourquoi elle est là. Racontez-nous un petit peu l'intrigue et comment vous êtes arrivé surtout à cette intrigue.
Well, to explain the plot, I have to tell you about the background to the specific novella. In the Netherlands, they have a foundation that promotes reading and books in the Netherlands. And every year they have, I think it's 2 weeks that they call the weeks of the suspense novel. And during this week, to promote books and to get more people into bookshops, they invite a crime author to write what they call a gift book, which is really a novella. It's only 27,000 words that are allowed to be written. And every 4th year, they invite a foreign author, someone from outside the Netherlands. So a few years ago, I had the great honor of being invited to write the gift book for the week of the suspense novel in the Netherlands. And it's a wonderful occasion. They fly you over if you agree. You have to also promise to keep it very secret because the announcement of who is going to write the next suspense novel is a huge secret in the Netherlands. There's an almost medieval initiation ceremony that you take part in, and then you have to go away and write the novella. As I said, only 27,000 words, which for me was a real problem because my novels are usually between 100,000 and sometimes even 200,000 words. So suddenly I had to write a book, but in a very condensed format. And to put even more pressure on me, at the time, I was still trying to establish myself in the Netherlands as an author. But because they print 400,000 of these gift books, it was a wonderful way for me to get my work under the eyes of the Dutch readers. So I had to try and write a novel that showed the kind of books that I usually write, but in a very much shorter format. So those were the challenges. And then when I started thinking, but what do I write about? Because South Africa has a very interesting relationship with the Netherlands in that it was the Dutch East India Company that started the halfway station here in what is today Cape Town, in 1652. And that is really how the South African European history started. A lot of our ancestors, the white people in South Africa, a lot of our ancestors come from the Netherlands or from France or from Germany, but that is really where it started. So there's this very intimate connection historically with the Netherlands. So I started looking at the history, and I started looking at the timing, and I wanted to make some sort of a connection in the novel with this relationship with the Netherlands. So that's where the initial idea for the plot came from. I am a huge fan of art. I love the Dutch masters. And, you know, when I started doing research, I came across Fabricius, the painter Fabricius, who was also in Donna Tartt's novel, The Goldfinch, that I absolutely adored. And when I realized that Fabricius died around about the time that the halfway station, the colony in South Africa, was started by the Dutch, I started getting certain ideas. And that is where the heart of the story started developing. And then, you know, once you have the concept of what you want to do, then you start extrapolating and trying to create a story from there. But because I write crime fiction, I usually need a dead body. So the question was, who's going to be the victim? And then the next question is, who was the killer? and how do I present that whole story to the audience?
Très bien. Bah alors cette fois, il s'agit donc d'une œuvre, d'une toile d'un maître flamand, hein, l'âge d'or, qu'on retrouve au Cap. Et effectivement, il y a un gros billet. Hein, si on retrouve cette œuvre, ça vaudrait en vente aux enchères à peu près 50 000 $. Alors là, vous parlez d'art. Mais Benny Grissel, ben, ça brosse un petit peu tout. Alors, il y a la proie qui vient de paraître au format poche. Là, on avait un cadavre qui était balancé depuis la fenêtre d'un train de luxe. J'ai le souvenir d'une intrigue dans les comment dit-on, excusez-moi, j'ai de l'anglais qui me vient en tête, les vignobles, pardon, pour le vin d'Afrique du Sud, qui est quand même un commerce aussi juteux. Vous avez parlé des startups, etc. Qu'est-ce qui dirige, qu'est-ce qui pilote? Comment est-ce que vous choisissez les thèmes? Est-ce que vous compulsez les informations? Comment est-ce qu'elles vous arrivent, ces histoires?
I do explore the news. I mean, as a former journalist, I am still a news junkie. I read a lot of newspapers every day. I read a lot of local and international news publications online every day. Not only for story ideas, but just because I want to be informed and I find the world a very interesting and fascinating place. But I think as an author, one is always looking for story ideas. Everything you read, everything you hear, everything you experience, you are assessing all the time for story potential. And, you know, the great thing about the world that we live in general, and South Africa in particular, is that there are probably 5 good story ideas every day. But not every one of them works for me. Not everyone works for the characters that I usually use. So I keep collecting story ideas, and then often when you put 2 ideas together, there's this little explosion of excitement. And that is how I choose my stories. I wait until I find an idea that excites me. Because writing a novel is, for me, is 12 to 18 months. It's a marathon. And if I'm not excited about the story concept that I have, then it's going to be a very painful writing process. So I wait until I find a story that really gets me excited, gets me passionate. I want to tell the story. And then I start doing research, and I do research for several months. And the great thing about research is that the more you do research, the more story ideas you have, the more directions you can go with a book. You know, writing is really making creative decisions and solving story problems creatively. And if you do a lot of research, then you have so many more options to choose from, and you can really choose the best in terms of the story that you're telling. And then I don't do a lot of planning beforehand. I love discovering the story in the writing process. And then it's really a matter of sitting down and writing the book, and wrestling with the writing problems from day to day and try and find the solutions that are exciting and that you hope will be exciting for the reader as well.
Et alors, aujourd'hui, vous êtes, voilà, vous compulsez, puis vous attendez la petite étincelle. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé la première fois? Parce que je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, vous étiez journaliste, et puis à 36 ans, vous publiez votre premier polar. Qu'est-ce qui se passe à ce moment-là? Qu'est-ce qui vous décide? Est-ce que vous écriviez depuis toujours? Et pourquoi le polar?
Well, I decided to write the book because I needed money badly. I was a single parent. I was a single breadwinner, and I thought I had to try and make extra money. And the only thing that I could do was either journalism or writing fiction. And I actually started writing short stories first for South African magazines because I didn't know if I could do this, if I was good enough to publish short stories and later a novel. And as I had more and more success with the short stories, I always wanted to write a book. I mean, that was I think that was the big dream for many years, although I never thought that I wouldn't be able to. I never thought I was good enough. And then finally, when I gained enough self-confidence with the short stories, I decided to attempt a novel. The problem was that this was just after the end of apartheid. There were no suspense fiction novels in South Africa, written and published in South Africa, and also not in my mother tongue of Afrikaans. So, and the story that I wanted to tell was a crime story, but there was nothing like that in Afrikaans being published. So I thought, this is what I want to write. I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to write it. And I wrote the book and I sent it off to the publisher. And I can't tell you why crime fiction. I think probably because it's the genre that I absolutely adored from 14 years, 15 years old. When I discovered crime fiction as a 14-year-old, I just fell in love with it. It was my favorite thing to read, especially the great American authors like Ed McBain and John D. MacDonald and a whole host of others. So by the time I started writing, that was just what I wanted to do. It was never a conscious decision. As a matter of fact, when I wrote the first book, I didn't think of myself as a crime fiction author. I just thought of myself as a storyteller. And when the first reviews started appearing in the local media, the reviewers were referring to me as a crime fiction author. And I thought, wow, that's cool. Yes, I probably am. I've never felt stuck with crime fiction. I've written novels like L'année de Lion, Fever in English. I still think of myself as a storyteller, but it just so happens that most of my stories are in the crime genre, and I'm very comfortable there. I love writing crime fiction. I still love reading crime fiction. So it's maybe just a good match. It's maybe just, love at first sight in my teenage years, and here I am in my early 60s and still loving it.
L'amour qui dure. Alors, vous m'avez dit l'autre jour au téléphone que finalement, s'il n'y avait pas eu de roman policier pendant cette période, pendant l'apartheid, voilà, vous m'expliquiez ça justement, ce rapport au crime. Racontez-nous un petit peu pourquoi, selon vous, il y a eu cette grande page blanche, en tout cas cette absence du genre policier pendant la ségrégation.
I think there are several reasons for that. First of all, I think it is very hard to write crime fiction under a regime where the state is evil, where the state is not a benevolent state. Because your detective is always the representative of the government, of the state. And if the state is not good, then it's very hard to have a character representing that state, representing justice, that is credible. Crime fiction is a lot about justice, and if it's under an unjust governmental system, then I think it's very hard to write that. And you see that in a lot of other countries where you have non-democratic regimes as well. There's very little crime fiction. I think that's the one reason. I think the second reason is that during apartheid, the government censored and banned books. And I've always thought that crime fiction especially can be very critical of government, critical of society. And I don't think any crime fiction would have been published under apartheid. I don't think the government would have allowed it unless it was very demure and light and not serious crime fiction. So I think those are the two main reasons. And South Africans were reading mostly crime fiction from elsewhere in the world at that time. Even my first book in South Africa, in Afrikaans, crime fiction, it was so strange for Afrikaans people to read crime fiction in Afrikaans that the book hardly sold. I think it sold 800 copies. It took me many years to build an audience in Afrikaans for Afrikaans people and South Africans eventually in general, reading my English translations, to accept crime fiction that was written by a South African and that happens in South Africa.
Alors, la ségrégation, en fait, cette année, hein, la fin de l'apartheid, les 20 ans, et ça n'a pas tout réglé. Aujourd'hui, on voit, là, il y a eu 300 morts, il y a eu des émeutes en juillet terribles. Qu'est-ce qui se passe? Comment est-ce que c'est aujourd'hui l'Afrique du Sud? Est-ce que c'est un pays qui est resté violent ou est-ce qu'on a peur que la violence revienne?
No, I'm not scared that it's going to come back. You know, if you asked me this question 4 years ago, I would have been much more worried. 4 years ago, we had a president that was very corrupt and criminal. We were in the midst of state capture where a whole bunch of the president and his cronies were trying to capture the state and turn it into profit for them. So I would have been very worried then, but I'm very happy to say that we have a very good president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, who has been running the country now. And he's working very, very hard to fight corruption and to bring us back to success, to economic growth, etc., etc. We still have a long way to go. Unfortunately, the bad forces, the forces of corruption and state capture is still there. They're a minority, but they're still making trouble. And what you're seeing now with the riots was a minority of people trying to disrupt our new president and his efforts to clean up the country. So we still have a long way to go. You know, COVID-19 has done so much damage to our economy. Our unemployment rate has now reached new records. So it's been a perfect storm of, first of all, the previous president and the damage that he did through his criminality, and then COVID coming straight after that. Tourism is our main source of income in South Africa, and there's been very little tourism during the past 18 months. And we're just hoping that when things get back to a new normal, that the tourists will start coming back, because we have the most beautiful country in the world. We have this incredible wildlife. We have nature that'll boggle your mind. So we're really hoping that people will come back. But yes, it's a you know, if you have a country with great inequality, you have a country with a high unemployment rate, and then you can expect that there will be more crime than in a first world country like France or anywhere in the northern hemisphere. But I'm positive that we can solve these problems. We've always managed to solve our problems in South Africa. Sometimes it takes us a long time, and sometimes there a lot of damage is done on the way. But I'm still positive that we can turn it around and be the country that Nelson Mandela had in mind when he walked out of jail 30 years ago. 30 years ago.
Et alors justement, est-ce que le rôle de l'écrivain qui est le vôtre, puisque vous racontez le pays tel qu'il est, hein, vous parlez de corruption, il y a quand même des clins d'œil malgré tout à du racisme blanc-noir dans les deux sens d'ailleurs, est-ce que vous vous êtes investi, vous, d'un rôle de raconter ou de tirer la sonnette d'alarme? Comment est-ce qu'on se positionne quand on écrit?
Well, it's a very tough question to answer, because obviously I'm invested in South Africa. I love this country so much. And I really care deeply about the country. And I would love to see that we create a country where all our children have a much better future. So there is this personal view, this personal ideology inside of me. But I honestly try, when I write my stories, not to let the stories be an outlet for my own ideology, my own views. I try to be as honest as possible in terms of my characters. I have white and colored and black characters. And in South Africa, we speak of colored people as mixed race people. So I know in certain parts of the world, it's not a good word, but in South Africa, it is a generally accepted word. And I have characters of all colors and ethnicities and cultural backgrounds in my books. What I then try to do is to try and see the world and try and see South Africa through their eyes and be honest in terms of how they would react, what they would do, what they would say. And I think in presenting the reader with a diversity of viewpoints in terms of my characters, I can leave it up to the reader to make up their own mind. I'm not going to be afraid to look at corruption, because everybody in South Africa knows that there's a lot of corruption. everybody knows that our previous president was a criminal. So to ignore that would be stupid. But my approach has been, let my characters deal with it. Let them, in their own way and through their own perspective, let them make social commentary. Eventually, I think they will give a balanced opinion, and some of it will reflect my own views and some of it won't. But I think that's fair, and I think that's the honest way of doing it.
Très bien. Eh bien, écoutez, effectivement, alors au lecteur de se faire son opinion. Donc, dans La femme au manteau bleu, qui paraît la nouveauté à la série Noire Gallimard, ou en poche, La proie. Deon Meyer, merci beaucoup d'avoir été avec nous au cœur de l'hiver. Et on espère vous voir bientôt, alors peut-être à Quai du Polar 2022, peut-être avant. Merci beaucoup et à bientôt.
Merci à toi et à bientôt.